Close your eyes for just a moment. Picture a summer morning in America. The year is 1955. The screen door slaps shut behind a 10-year-old boy. No one checks where he is going. No one asks when he will be back. His mother just says one thing: be home before the streetlights come on. Grabs his bike. No helmet, no pads, no phone. And he disappears down the street with his friends into a world that no parent of today would recognize. Because in the 1950s, childhood was different, wonderfully, terrifyingly, beautifully different. Kids ran free. They played hard. They took risks. And somehow, most of them survived to tell the stories we are about to hear. These were not bad parents. These were not reckless children. This was simply life in post-war America. A time when independence was taught, not protected against. When scraped knees were a badge of honor, and danger was just another word for Tuesday afternoon. Today, we are going back to a time that feels like a dream now, back to 5 things every 1950s kid did on a regular basis. Things that would make a modern parent's heart stop cold. Is how American kids really lived. Before bubble wrap and bike helmets, there was just the wind in your face and the smell of asphalt after a summer rain. Every 1950s kid owned a bicycle, and that bicycle was freedom on 2 wheels. They rode to school, to the creek, to the next town over if they felt like it. No helmet, no knee pads, no parent following behind in a station wagon, just a kid, a bike, and the open road. Crashes happened, torn up. A few kids cracked their heads on curbs. But they got up, they wiped off the gravel, and they got right back on. That was just part of riding a bike. Every neighborhood had that one tree, the one that seemed to touch the clouds. And every kid had one mission: get to the top. There were no harnesses, no safety mats below. The ground was hard, the branches were unforgiving, and the climb was everything. Kids went up 20, 30, sometimes 40 feet without a second thought. Falls happened. Arms got broken. But those trees were classrooms of a different kind. They taught balance, courage, and how to read a branch before you trusted it with your weight. The creek at the edge of town was the closest thing to magic that most 1950s kids ever knew. You could spend an entire day there and never run out of things to explore. They waded in barefoot, not knowing what was underfoot. They swam in water that nobody tested. They built dams, caught crawdads, explored upstream for hours, completely alone, completely unsupervised. Strong currents, slippery rocks, holes with no warning. None of it stopped them. The creek was theirs, and they knew every inch of it better than any adult ever did. Before they were banned in 1988, lawn darts, or jarts as many families called them, were a staple of the American backyard. Big, heavy, the metal-tipped projectiles that you threw high into the air in the direction of other people. The physics of this game were terrifying. You lobbed a weighted metal spike 30 feet into the sky and hoped it landed inside a plastic hoop and not on your little sister's foot. Thousands of injuries were reported over the years. There were even deaths. But in the 1950s and into the 1960s, jarts sat on store shelves right next to board games and badminton sets. a fun thing for the whole family. It is almost impossible to imagine now, but in 1950s America, hitchhiking was not seen as dangerous. It was transportation. If you needed to get somewhere and had no ride, you stuck out your thumb. Kids as young as 10 or 11 would hitchhike to the swimming hole, a friend's farm, even into the next county. Strangers stopped and picked them up without a second thought. That is just what people did. It was a different world, to be sure. A world of trust that feels almost naive today, but for a generation of kids growing up in small town and rural America, the open road was never something to fear. In the 1950s, firecrackers were not special occasion items. They were available at the 5 and dime, at roadside stands, sometimes even at the corner drug store. With 50 cents could come home with enough explosives to terrorize the whole block. Cherry bombs, M80s, ash cans. These were not the little snapping poppers of today. Some of these were practically small sticks of dynamite. Kids put them under tin cans, dropped them into gopher holes, and occasionally lobbed them at each other. Fingers were lost, eardrums were damaged, eyes were hurt, but the culture around firecrackers was deeply rooted in American boyhood. And no parent thought twice about a kid buying a bag of them. The space race fired up imaginations all across America, and 1950s kids took it personally. If the government was going to shoot rockets into space, then by golly, they were going to do it too. In the backyard, with whatever they could find. Boys mixed their own rocket fuel from materials found at the hardware store. They built launch tubes out of tin cans and steel pipe. The rockets went up, and occasionally sideways, or backwards, or directly into the neighbor's fence. These were not professionally built model kits with safety parachutes. These were volatile homemade devices built by 12-year-olds who had read one magazine article. The wonder of it is that more kids were not seriously hurt. Today's chemistry sets are glorified food coloring experiments, but the chemistry sets of the 1950s came with actual chemicals, acids, reactive metals, compounds that could produce real smoke, real fire, and real toxic gas if mixed incorrectly. Companies like Gilbert and Porter sold sets that contained sodium ferrocyanide, potassium permanganate, and ammonia compounds. Materials that would never pass today's safety standards in a million years. Set up labs in their basements, garages, and sheds. Parents were proud. They were producing little scientists. A few of those little scientists also produced accidental explosions and mysterious skin burns. But the scientific spirit was alive in every American home. There was something primal about fire that no 1950s kid could resist. And in an era before organized screens and structured play dates, a vacant lot and a box of matches was an entire afternoon's entertainment. Kids burned trash heaps, set fields on fire to watch how fast it spread. They lit pine cones, old magazines, anything that would catch. They stared into flames the way children today stare at phones. Accidental house fires, brush fires that got out of hand, singed eyebrows and scorched hands. These were the occasional consequences of growing up in a country where boys were expected to be a little bit wild. Boy's first gun was a rite of passage in 1950s America. Not a toy, not a water pistol, a real weapon. Most boys got a BB gun around 8 or 9, and many had graduated to a real .22 rifle by the time they were 10 or 11. They shot at everything: cans, fence posts, paper targets tacked to trees. In rural areas, they hunted squirrels and rabbits before they were in middle school. It was considered an essential life skill. Gun safety was taught at home, in Boy Scout troops, and in some schools. But accidents still happened. The combination of real firearms and unsupervised children produced a certain number of tragedies, accepted as part of a culture that had always lived closely with guns. Family pickup truck was not just transportation. For kids in the 1950s, bed was the greatest seat in the house. You climbed in, found a spot near the cab, and held on, or sometimes did not hold on at all. Families drove 60 miles an hour down open highways, with children bouncing around loose in the back like cargo. Kids stood up into the wind, hung over the sides, and dared each other to stand with their arms out like airplane wings. A hard break or a sharp curve could send a child flying, and sometimes it did. But the image of kids in the back of a pickup truck was so woven into the fabric of American rural life that nobody questioned it for decades. Every block had that one kid who could build things. And what they built, more often than not, was a vehicle designed to go as fast as possible with as little control as possible. These were homemade go-karts, soapbox racers, and gravity-powered wooden death machines. Lawnmower engines were borrowed and bolted on. Rope-steered front wheels meant you were mostly hoping, not driving. Brakes were either absent, or the bottoms of your sneakers dragged across the pavement. At the bottom of every great hill was either a triumphant finish or a spectacular crash. Kids aimed for the first and cheerfully accepted the second. The crashes were half the point. That was the deal. Mini bikes and small motorcycles were everywhere in 1950s and early 1960s America. A father would buy one for the family farm, and within a week, every child within 3 blocks was taking turns on it, usually without asking. Kids drove them through fields, down country roads, and occasionally right down the middle of suburban streets. No license, no helmet, no protective gear of any kind, just pure speed and the exhilaration of controlling something that could really hurt you. Broken legs, road rash, and concussions were common bike injuries. But parents mostly shrugged. Building toughness was part of the plan. A kid who had never been thrown from a motorcycle had never really been tested, and was not just a James Dean movie moment. It was a real game that real kids played in every town in America. 2 bikes, 2 kids, 1 narrow road. Who blinks first? The rules were simple. You rode straight at each other as fast as you could go. The first one to swerve was a chicken. The one who held on longest, or until the collision, won. What they won exactly was unclear, but it felt very important at the time. The game was played on bikes, in cars among older teenagers, and sometimes just running at each other on the playground. It was a test of nerve, of willpower, of the peculiar 1950s male belief that flinching was the greatest disgrace. School buses in the 1950s were not the safety, optimized vehicles of today. They were repurposed commercial buses, often old and poorly maintained, driven by men who may or may not have had specific training for transporting children. Inside were no seat belts. Kids stood in the aisles. They hung out windows. They climbed over seats and, occasionally, each other. Discipline was the driver shouting over his shoulder while navigating a two-lane highway. Bus accidents were tragically common in this era. Vehicles that lacked modern safety standards, roads that lacked proper signage, and drivers without the specialized training we require today created real dangers every single morning. If you were thirsty and outside in the 1950s, you did not go inside for a glass of water. You found the nearest garden hose, turned it on, and drank straight from the rubber nozzle. It tasted like hot rubber and chlorine, and it was absolutely delicious. The problem, of course, was that garden hoses in the 1950s were made with materials we now know are deeply problematic. PVC plastics, fittings, chemicals that leached into the water. With every hot summer day, kids drank from those hoses morning, noon, and night. Nobody thought twice about it. The hose was water, and water was what you needed. What you were ingesting along with it. It was a mystery nobody thought to solve for another 40 years. In the 1950s, medicine cabinets were open territory. Kids with headaches reached in and took aspirin on their own. Cough syrup was dispensed freely. Many over. The counter remedies of the era contained ingredients that would be regulated or banned today. Cough syrups with codeine, stomach medicines with bismuth compounds, sleep aids and teething, medications with ingredients that would raise serious red flags in any modern pharmacy. Ray's syndrome, a dangerous condition linked to children taking aspirin, was not identified until the 1960s and not widely communicated until the 1980s. Entire childhoods passed with kids self-medicating on aspirin for every small complaint. Counter at the 5 and dime was paradise. And the colors, the impossibly bright reds, yellows, and greens of 1950s penny candy, were achieved with artificial dyes that were completely unregulated for most of the decade. Red dye number 2, yellow number 5, colors that have since been linked to hyperactivity, allergies, and in some cases carcinogenic effects in animal testing. Kids ate pounds of this stuff every week and washed it down with bright orange and grape sodas loaded with the same dyes. The FDA was still finding its footing in consumer protection. The food industry largely policed itself, and a generation of American children served, unknowingly, as the test population for a vast uncontrolled experiment in artificial food coloring. Nearly every home in 1950s America was painted with lead-based paint. It was everywhere: walls, window sills, stair railings, furniture. It was bright, durable, and cheerful. It was also slowly toxic. When the paint chipped or flaked, which it always did, the dust and chips settled into the environment where children lived, breathed, and played. Young children chewed on painted window sills and furniture. Toddlers ate paint chips directly off the floor. Lead accumulates in the body over time, affecting brain development and nervous system function. The damage often did not show as obvious immediate symptoms, is why it took so long for the medical community to connect the dots. Lead paint was not banned in residential use until 1978. Cigarette smoking was so normalized in 1950s America that it barely registers as remarkable. Adults smoked everywhere, in offices, in hospitals, in churches. And teenage boys, often even younger, smoked right along with them. There was no age verification at most corner stores. A boy of 12 or 13 could walk in and buy a pack of Lucky Strikes or Camels without anyone raising an eyebrow. Some stores sold individual cigarettes for a penny apiece. Surgeon General would not issue his landmark warning about smoking and cancer until 1964. Before that report, even doctors endorsed cigarette brands in advertisements. A whole generation of children lit up before they were old enough to understand what they were doing to their lungs. Public swimming pools existed in the 1950s, but they were not where kids went when they really wanted to swim. They went to the quarry, to the river bend with the deep hole everyone knew about, to the pond at the edge of somebody's farm. These were not regulated. There were no lifeguards, no depth markers, no way to know what was beneath the surface. Submerged machinery, hidden currents, offs that went from shallow to 10 feet deep in a single step. Drowning was one of the leading causes of accidental death among children in the 1950s, and many of those tragedies happened in exactly these kinds of places. Yet every summer, every kid in every town still found their way to the water because the water was magnificent. The playgrounds of the 1950s were constructed from heavy steel and unforgiving ambition. Towering metal slides that got searingly hot in the summer sun. Merry-go-rounds that could be spun to terrifying speeds by a sufficiently motivated group of 10-year-olds. Jungle gyms that stood 12 feet off the ground over nothing but packed dirt and gravel. Saws engineered to launch the lighter child into the air if the heavier one jumped off suddenly. These playgrounds were phenomenally, hilariously dangerous. Kids went to school with missing teeth, broken arms, and gravel-studded foreheads as normal Monday morning occurrences. The equipment was eventually replaced, slowly, over decades. But an entire generation remembers those steel monsters with a strange and genuine affection. Every American town there were ruins, old factories, shut down mines, abandoned houses at the edge of the county that had stood empty since before any living child could remember. These were irresistible. Kids climbed through broken windows, descended into mine shafts, crept through buildings whose floors might collapse at any moment. They found old machinery, mysterious artifacts, the remnants of lives lived before they were born. Every abandoned place was an archaeology project, and a haunted house rolled into one. Floors gave way. Old mine gas accumulated. Rusty nails and broken glass were everywhere. A few children did not come back from these adventures, but the pull of the forbidden and the unknown was stronger than any warning a parent could give. Traveling carnival came to every small town in America once or twice a year. It was pure electric magic. Lights, music, the smell of popcorn and diesel fuel mixing in the night air. Rides. Spectacular, dangerous, completely unregulated rides. These carnivals moved from town to town, and the rides moved with them. Assembled and disassembled by crews working fast. Bolts that might have been checked thoroughly in the last town might not have been checked at all in this one. Carnival accidents were distressingly common throughout this era. Riders were thrown, ride mechanisms failed, safety bars that were never more than suggestions gave way. But every child lined up anyway, 'cause nothing in life matched the feeling of that first drop. And perhaps the most dangerous thing of all, the one that threads through every other item on this list, was the simple, the radical, breathtaking freedom of being completely alone in the world. A 1950s child left the house in the morning and was gone until dinner. No cell phone, no check-in calls, no GPS tracker, no way for a parent to know where their child was, who they were with, or what they were doing for 8 to 10 hours at a stretch. They walked alone to school through empty fields. They biked to the next town over on a whim. They stayed out past dark in the summer, coming home by instinct and the dying light. They were, by modern standards, completely unsupervised and remarkably free. And what that freedom gave them, the confidence, the resilience, the deep knowledge of their own capabilities, was something that no amount of supervised, scheduled, safety, padded modern childhood has ever fully replaced. Those kids grew up. Many of them became our parents, our grandparents, the men and women who built the interstates, launched the satellites, marched for civil rights, and raised the next America in the houses they bought with their first paychecks, carried scars. Literal ones from the falls and the fires and the roads that never gave way. And something else too. An unshakable sense that they had tested themselves against the world and come through it. We look back now and we worry. And maybe that is right. Some of what they did was genuinely dangerous in ways that did not need to be. Lead paint and unregulated chemicals and the absence of seat belts. Those were real hazards that took real lives, and we were right to fix them. But something else was lost too. Something harder to name. A particular quality of childhood that belonged to open roads and long afternoons and the complete, terrifying, magnificent freedom of a summer day with nowhere to be and no one watching. Those screen doors are still out there somewhere. Somewhere in the amber of American memory, they are still slapping shut behind 10-year-old boys and girls who are already running, already gone, already living the wild, probable, unrepeatable adventure of growing up. Maybe we cannot go back. Maybe we should not. But we can remember. And in remembering, we can hold on to just a little of what it felt like to be that free.